Today is Monday, September 23rd, 2019, and this is a regular meeting of the Eugene Planning Commission. We, as many of you know, and we have people from the public here, we reserve some time at the beginning of a meeting for any public comments. We don't have anything currently in a quasi-judicial process for a hearing. But please know that if there is something, please don't talk about those items. Otherwise, anybody fill out a green form, or if you haven't, do you want to come speak? And you can fill out the green form afterwards. I'm looking out at the seats, and it looks like no. Okay, I have an idea of why you're all here, so we'll wait until then. Okay. So we're going to start. Agenda item A is the Planning Commission elections. So I want to start. Does staff want to introduce anything for Planning Commission elections before I move forward?
I don't think I have anything special to introduce. You know, we're just electing for the next year of chair and vice chair. We typically do this after the appointments happen. This year we're a little late on this. I had asked the chair if she'd be willing to stick in there just a little bit longer, and that's because of all the appeals that we've been handling. So here we are. That's it.
Perfect. Okay. So in the past for elections, we haven't had them anonymous. So I just want to verify that you're okay actually voting and having it be public, so we know who's voting for what. Okay, I'm seeing nods. Everybody's okay with that. Is there interest for, why don't we start with chair? So I've got one hand up. It's Commissioner Edwards.
Yes, thank you. Colleagues, I appreciate, I've been serving as the vice chair for this past year under Chair Taylor, and I've really appreciated and enjoyed the opportunity. I've had the opportunity to lead a few of the meetings, and while I know I have some learning to do when it comes to running the meetings and whatnot, I do definitely have an interest in serving as your chair for the next year. And I also have a lot of good ideas that at some point I'd like to share with you about that. So I would like to officially ask for your support in electing me as chair of the Planning Commission.
Okay, great. Thank you. And is anybody interested, just so we know that there's interest? Oh, Commissioner Borofsky.
I think you're sort of put there. My name right here.
I'm going to pause for a minute as Commissioner Borofsky sits down. So now we have 6 planning commissioners sitting at the table. So Commissioner Borofsky, the first agenda item is Planning Commission elections, and Commissioner Edwards has raised her hand and has showed an interest for the chair position, and I just want to make sure.
I move to nominate Commissioner Edwards as the chair.
Okay, let's just move that forward. Are there any seconds?
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved, it's been seconded, and any discussion? And she already made a little pitch for herself. Okay, so since there's no questions or discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, so that's unanimous. Okay, your chair.
Does that mean I'm taking?
Well, do you want me to complete the elections, or do you want her to complete it? Usually or do you want me to complete the?
It's up to you.
What would you like to do?
Why don't you go ahead and complete the elections and then?
Okay, thank you, Chair Edwards. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So now we move to co-chair. Are there any interested commissioners? Commissioner Fragola has expressed some interest. Anybody else? Okay, great.
I would like to nominate that we elect Commissioner Fragola as the vice chair of the Planning Commission.
Okay, there's been a motion. Any seconds?
Second.
Okay, it's been motioned seconded. And any comments, discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, it's unanimous. Okay, so I am going to hand over, I'm going to switch seats.
Okay.
And maybe you can just even stay where you're seated, and Commissioner Fragola can sit there. I'm going to hand you that. And the rest of the meeting, pardon me?
You want to switch?
Yeah, I'll switch with you.
Okay. That work?
Yeah, that works.
Here, I'll scoot over. It's a little easier.
Okay, just shift over.
Yeah.
Never works fast.
Her plug.
Okay, sorry, everyone.
Excuse
out
us
there
while we shuffle
electronically.
around.
We'll just shuffle.
And I apologize for being late, but the Peace Health ride bikes weren't functioning this morning.
Oh.
So I walked to 3 of them and none of them could connect. So
Shoot.
I had to walk all the way instead of riding my blue bike.
Well, I'm glad you showed up.
Yeah.
Yes. Good to have you. Thank you. All right.
If I may, I'd just like to say thank you very much to Commissioner Taylor for serving as chair and for all the hard work that you put on into that. There have been a ton of challenging decisions, and you've really done an excellent job, so thank you.
Great, thank you. And I just want to thank Commissioner Edwards because there were a few times I had to recuse myself for vacation. So like you said, you got some great training on some difficult decisions. So yeah, thanks for being a great team member. And everybody else for, I think this is a really, I've really enjoyed this commission. So thank you. Yeah, it was easy to be chair.
All right. Well, with that, so we have the second item on our agenda is the committee assignments. And I am assuming or hoping that most of you had a chance to go through, if you recall last year, and I know Commissioner Beeson, you're new to this process, but we basically kind of went through a series of committees that are happening in the community that each of us sort of play a liaison role. And so I think that it's a pretty informal process that we kind of went through. I mean, and I'm looking to.
Yeah, totally. Very, very informal. You all can just decide how you want to identify folks for different committees, liaisons, and project resources. I have copies of the existing one if anyone needs one. Should I just pass them all down? Okay,
You can share.
there's 3. And then I'll pass, I'll just, you have, you two have copies? Okay, great. And one more.
Perfect.
Thank you.
There we go. So
Okay.
you might, just as a suggestion, you could just walk down through from the top and decide, amongst yourselves who you'd like to have in there. And I think, Commissioner Beeson, you're the newest here, and I don't think have been assigned yet to any.
I haven't been.
Okay.
Great.
And of course, yeah. Figure it out.
So question, I don't recall how we assigned these last year, if it was I don't believe we voted on each of them, did we? Or did we just, kind of, folks just volunteered and generally we went with?
I think you just sorted it out amongst yourselves, yeah. If it comes down to it, you can vote if you want to.
Okay. Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you. I just have a quick question. Staff, do you see these are still relevant standing committees, and are there any additional committees that you see forthcoming in the next year?
Great question.
Good question. The only one that I can think of that might need to be added is something having to do with HB 2001.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I can't think of anything else new that would need to come up.
Perfect, thank you.
Commissioner Borowski.
Yeah, and dovetailing to that, do you see any there here that are going to be stagnant for the year? I mean, if I look at these comp plan phase 2s, both of those basically were stagnant for the last year. We didn't really have any meeting on that. Do you foresee that going forward in the next year or not? I mean, there's that one. There's University Neighborhood Plan. Do you really think we're going to get to that this year? I mean, I know there's a little bit of work done on that.
I think the only one that might sunset over the year is moving ahead. That's moving into council decision-making pretty soon.
Yep.
And so that one will probably be done by the next time we have this conversation, but the other 2 will be ramping up, so I wouldn't want to take them off.
Okay. All 3, like the,
Comp plan, diagram, and university, right?
Okay,
I would
perfect.
want to keep those.
okay.
Keeping those? Just a quick question, as a clarification, CDBG committee, there's a note at the bottom that it doesn't have a designated seat for planning commission participation is incidental, and that seemed a little cryptic to me. I wasn't. What does that mean?
That, I can answer that. So that is that's a standing committee that is outside of the planning commission. Usually it had a planning commissioner on it, but it is appointed through a separate process other than this. So I'm on that one, and actually Chris Ramey is on that one through the outside thing. So usually what I'll do is give updates to that. I think that if there were no planning commissioners on there, we would maybe lobby the I think that's a city manager.
It's not one we appoint here.
That's right. I think basically it just means there isn't a seat dedicated to a planning commissioner.
Right.
So, but you've always kind of had one.
Yeah, and there are a few in that fit that that same description where, like, the Envision Eugene Technical Advisory Committee is another one where it was an appointment process, and I think Commissioner Borowski and I both sit on that as appointees, and then we play that role as liaison and kind of
Actually,
co-lead.
my seat on there is a planning commission.
Yours is, right, but mine is not, correct. Okay, so if,
Sorry.
sure, Commissioner
So
Taylor.
just so Commissioner Beeson has perspective, like Sustainability Commission, maybe if staff can go through, there are only a few that are actually appointed seats, like Sustainability Commission, it's not actually a seat at the table. We are a liaison, we sit out in the public. So there are many of these that we're just a liaison to ask questions that are relevant to our role in the city and to bring relevant pieces of Sustainability Commission to us at certain meetings. So what, staff, if you can just talk about which ones, other than project resources, obviously we have a seat, we're playing a role, but in the liaison and ongoing standing committees, which ones actually have seats? So Commissioner Beeson.
That's a good question.
Historic Review Board would have one.
Yeah, definitely HRB.
ETAC has one.
Yes.
Sustainability has one.
No, there's no seat.
Oh, no seat.
No
Okay.
seat.
Yeah, I don't think there's a
Human
seat.
rights, housing, and sustainabilities are all liaisons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think in the UO community that it's not.
It's on hiatus. It's
Yeah, it's on
uncertain whether
hiatus.
that'll start back up again.
Okay.
Never met in the 7 years.
UTAC. So I think basically just the top three with
Yep.
the exception of the UO community liaison.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let's start this way then. Let's look at the Historic Review Board. That is currently being, that position is being held by Commissioner Baker, and you fill that role, and is that a role that you're comfortable continuing to do?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I was going to suggest that maybe we ask Commissioner Beeson, we could circle all the ones where Commissioner Randall was on, but Commissioner Beeson might want to suggest ones that he might be interested in, and then we could, move off of our
Okay.
position.
I think that makes,
We could circle all the Randall ones because those are all places where
Yeah,
where
we've
we
got
have-
3 vacancies.
So I spent time going through the list and looking at it, and as you know, I'm pretty new. I will tell you, in general, I'm interested in pretty much all of this. I think there's a lot of opportunity here to learn about these different things. Having said that, I also looked at the ones where Commissioner Randall was on, and I would be interested in any of those if that made sense to the rest of you. I guess the other thing I'd say, I spent about 3 years on the Human Services Commission when I was with the Budget Committee, and I'm pretty interested in housing. I'm pretty interested in housing, particularly low income, middle income, but however these committees cross over that. The areas on here that have to do with the planning, with code improvements and so on, I don't know that I bring particular expertise to that, but I'm definitely interested in those kinds of things and learning about them. And I have some interest in the Sustainability Commission. I understand it's a liaison position, and Commissioner Ramey is on there. I have interest in that from just my time at eWeb and time that I spent on the energy side of the house over there. So how is that?
Yeah,
That's kind of what I've looked at.
Could I
Well, let me start, oh, okay.
I'll make another suggestion too. For a number of these, and a good example is Housing Policy Board and Sustainability. Sometimes the person that is appointed cannot make the meeting. And very often we would have, I mean, for quite a while, I was
Alternate?
an alternate. So there's sometimes a need for that. And if there are some that Commissioner Beeson has specific interest in, even if he isn't appointed to it, maybe he could, or maybe it would be the other way. Maybe he could be the primary and the other person could be the fallback.
Okay. Well, I think that Commissioner Beeson, I think that all makes good sense. I might suggest, because Commissioner Ramey isn't here, I don't want to reassign that one in particular, but I can speak for myself and tell you that the Housing Policy Board, for which I play that role, it's been a struggle for me just because it's in conflict with a different meeting that I have to go to, and those are Mondays at noon. And so if that is of interest to you, I would be happy to relinquish that liaisonship to you, and we can make that swap pretty easily.
And perhaps make him the alternate on sustainability.
Yeah, and I think that if you're interested in that as well. The other thing I will, not to go out of order or anything, I know that the River Road area planning process, I was the first, I don't know how to say that, the first alternate, and I had a number of challenges in attending those, and so Commissioner Fragala was so kind to be able to step in and had really been following that process. So that is another liaison appointment for which I would be looking for if somebody, whether it's Commissioner Fragala would like to step in and be the primary point person on that, or someone else, I would, those two for myself, I would gladly give someone else an opportunity. Commissioner Taylor.
So let me just clarify, project resources staff, 3 commissioners can be part of it, so it's not 2. So just in terms of area planning for River Road, it's not really a main and an alternate, so there's room on there even if Commissioner Edwards was to stay on, is my understanding. So those get 3. The other thing is, I think what might be interesting, because I actually am interested in House Bill 2001, is to hear from the other commissioners, not just Commissioner Beeson, where they want to be, similar to what you just did, jockeying out of places or into places before we comprehensively look at the whole list.
Okay. I think that makes sense. So you have an interest in House Bill 2001?
I do.
If that's a
Yeah.
ad hoc, okay.
And to kind of maintain some consistency, I would be interested, I don't need to be, is on clear and objective standards.
Okay. Well, I'm okay with if we would like to proceed that way, if maybe we know, well, Commissioner Beeson, let's see, we've made the switch to put you on the Housing Policy Board. The other that you had expressed interest in was, sorry, I made a note here, sustainability as like an alternate potentially.
Yeah, and I'd be
Just
good if
given-
we could just go through. I think,
Okay.
I've kind of given you an idea. I went through it, and those are kind of some things that I would look at, but it's probably good to just go through and see what everybody's.
Okay, so let's go now down to the ETAC, Technical Advisory Committee. Commissioner Borofsky sits on that. I sit on that as well. I'm not an alternate or backup, although Commissioner Baker is. But if Commissioner Baker, I'm not sure how you feel about that appointment, or if you've enjoyed
It's-
following that group, or?
It's fine. Again, I have never been called to be a backup because on that committee. Because it doesn't meet, doesn't meet very often.
It meets
You know,
monthly.
I think what might make sense would be to have Commissioner Edwards as the backup on that one. I mean, as
Yeah.
the liaison to this committee, just because we're both there, if one of us isn't there, usually the other one is.
Right.
So that would kind of, to me, makes more sense. She's an appointed member, I'm a member that's been sent in, so
Commissioner Taylor?
Does that present any conflict for you?
No.
Are you, have two hats? Or
Yeah, no.
Doesn't provide,
No.
okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
I think it's more just reporting back to this
Great.
board. You know, if I can't
Right.
make a meeting and there's something that should have been brought to the attention, I mean, almost everyone that I'm at, that I'm not at, she would be at, and vice versa, I
Great.
think. I don't think we've missed one, both. Okay.
So then let's skip down. I think the community liaison, UO community liaison, it sounds like that's somewhat in flux, but I think leaving Commissioner Ramey where he's at, unless anybody really would like to volunteer for that. We'll move down to the CDBG. Commissioner Borofsky and Commissioner Ramey are both appointed separately, and you both sit on that as appointees. So I think unless anyone has any compelling reason that they'd like to
We
monitor
don't have
that.
control over that
You
one.
don't
Yeah.
have any control.
All right, so the Sustainability Commission, we talked about this a bit. Commissioner Beeson would be interested. I don't know how everyone would feel about,
How do you feel about being the alternate on that?
You wanna be the alternate?
And just-
Like to be the alternate, but
Yeah.
again, I kind of defer to you guys.
I think that would work, and
Okay.
you both could go. I think that's
Okay.
just kind of, you,
Yep, okay.
Again, I was
Commissioner Baker.
going to comment, you're really not part of the committee.
Right.
You sit in the bleachers, so to speak.
Right.
So you could actually have two commissioners go. It's mainly to provide, when an issue is raised, you get in the queue to make a comment.
Yeah, I would just clarify that most of these are public meetings. Anyone can go to them. If you wanted to go and, watch any of these and, we would not keep you from doing that. I think it's more of a matter of being able to report back to this body the work that's happening in those committees. And I think that consistency would be important. So, I mean, I think that's why we have folks that have specifically designated so that, if there is a question and something comes up, we have somebody who's been following that committee. But again, you're welcome to attend any of those meetings anytime. Okay, so Human Rights Commission, Commissioner Fragala.
I would be happy to continue on that unless someone else is really interested in doing it. I would like to say it's been very difficult to attend because we've had so many hearings scheduled the same night. And I know how difficult it is for us to find dates that work for hearings, but hopefully I'll be able to attend more of those this coming year.
Okay.
Just a quick comment on that one. If there are times, or if we have a hole in your schedule, maybe sometime in February or something, we can invite staff from these other commissions or commission members to come give you an update or send you a memo or somehow do the communication that way.
That would be great.
That would,
Yeah.
I think that would be
What,
good.
what, do you have a preference on what you would like?
let's talk about it at the retreat.
Good idea.
Let's talk about, good idea. Okay, so Commissioner Beeson, you have graciously offered to sit in, follow along on the Housing Policy Board. So we'll go ahead and move past that one. The corridor planning, moving ahead. Commissioner Baker, you're currently the appointed volunteer on
I'm
that.
fine with that because it's ramping down and I've been involved with it for quite a while.
I wouldn't
mean, it's-
recommend adding anybody new at this point.
Yeah, I do also follow quite closely on that as well. So we don't have we have a vacancy, but I don't know that we need to.
Well,
that.
there are meetings occasionally. It's called the Sounding Board. And Borofsky, you have attended in the past or no?
Very early on in
As
the.
an alternate.
The first year.
Okay. Well,
First
if we
year I
can,
was-
if we can
Randall and I had to.
Yeah, it was Bill.
availability from Commissioner
And then
Baker, that
before
would be
that,
good.
we had another commissioner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So if there's nobody who's particularly interested in filling that vacancy, just because it is kind of midway through the process or more, we'll go ahead and just leave that as a vacancy and then have Commissioner Baker continue. Does that make sense with
Yeah.
everybody?
I would say it would be difficult if no planning commissioners could make the Sounding Board meeting, but we'll just make sure to coordinate and make sure that meetings are scheduled when you can attend, and if not, then we can find a
Again,
replacement.
it is an interesting committee. If someone else has interest, to attend, you know, you get the materials well in advance, and they're usually 3 months apart. But they are very interesting meetings, so.
Commissioner Taylor, you had
I follow Moving Ahead and have throughout its process. So if there was an urgent need, yeah, I can do that. And it sounds like Commissioner Edwards can too. So the two of us can kind of figure out whatever works for our schedule, and the both of us can be fill-in if needed.
Yes, I agree. That is a great way to handle that. So the urban reserves planning, Commissioner Baker and Commissioner Borowski.
I have a question on this one.
Sure.
So urban reserves planning has basically, we've kind of been doing that through the ETAC. Do you see this as a separate process, or do you see this as, like, once ETAC makes its recommendations, then this one kicks in? I'm just not real clear on it.
Yeah, it's not really a committee. It's a resource body that hasn't been as needed since there is the existence of ETAC. But I don't see any harm in keeping it on the list in case there were an issue that the project manager, Rebecca, wanted to bring to you in advance of coming to the full planning commission. I think that's the value of it. Okay. And it will be coming back in November to the full commission.
And my only comment there would be that maybe in an effort to keep the consistency with ETAC, that Commissioner Borowski and I be the 2-point people on there. That does leave, I am an alternate currently. Commissioner Baker could fill the vacancy if that's still of interest to you. On the urban reserves.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think just move you into.
So I can move into the vacancy, and then is there somebody who'd be interested in serving the alternate? Don't imagine that would be needed, but.
Yeah, alternates are actually not required. They're just if somebody's interested.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So we can just remove that. Okay, and then I touched on this before, the area planning for River Road, Santa Clara. I would probably suggest, just because I haven't really been following it to the degree that I would feel comfortable, if Commissioner Fragala would like to step into that primary role, or if someone else is
Yeah,
interested.
I've really enjoyed participating in that study and that project, and would like to continue to participate. And
Perfect. Commissioner Borowski.
I would suggest this might be a good one for Ken, just because it's moving along. It's a robust planning effort, and I think it would be a good learn how we write code and do that type of stuff. So I don't know if that would be something you'd be interested in, but you got a fine group of people over there that are engaged, and I don't know, just a thought.
I would be interested. I was going to be a little careful stepping up on each one of these, but I'm feeling like I'm getting a good, there's a number of things here that I'm interested in. I found going through all the material in preparation for the meeting today, it was really interesting. So I would be definitely open to that.
Well, we will. Commissioner
So
Taylor.
a quick question. Staff, I know there really isn't a lead role. This isn't a liaison. It's more of a committee. So how many is beneficial? I mean, do you need 3 people? What's helpful for you, considering that this is a bigger project?
I think it's helpful to have 3 just in case, because schedules are so crazy.
Yeah,
If you can't get all 3 together, maybe you can get 2. So
okay,
my personal opinion is 3 would be great.
okay. So if there isn't, we might want to check in with Commissioner Ramey, and maybe if there isn't someone here, we can come back either with Commissioner Ramey or go through the whole list and then revisit it. Because I was kind of thinking the same. Not sure.
And is that in reference to the River Road or just?
Yeah, River
general?
Road, just because I knew it was a committee, it's not a liaison, it's actually a committee, so it would help for it to have 3. Since nobody's, you're interested, but we could revisit this one after we finish the whole list and maybe even check back in with Commissioner Ramey.
The other thing we could probably do is touch on this during the retreat, if there's any, just to have Commissioner Ramey weigh in and that.
Yeah, we totally could. And if I may, just one of the reasons that it's helpful to have 2 or more is that it's nice to have different perspectives from both the commission And also, when the item comes back to the commission, to have a couple of different perspectives that can be shared at the commission about the discussion. So,
Okay, comprehensive plan 2, remaining chapters, Commissioners Borofsky, Ramey, and Taylor. Are there any of you, go ahead.
Little update on that.
Yeah.
I think the first chapter that we'll begin working on is the housing chapter, because we see it as a necessary component of implementing HB 2001. And so if you have an interest in that project, you may want to hop on the comprehensive plan resource list.
Well, let's see. So there's the remaining chapters, and then there's the parcel specific. We have the same liaisons on both. I don't know if it
No,
matters.
yeah.
No, Baker's different.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. I
Because
saw B.
they're very different.
Yeah.
I agree. Okay, I guess maybe then I'll ask from the folks that are on those if they have any feedback as far as changes to those. Commissioner Taylor.
These are ongoing, so I'm willing to stay committed. So we've been meeting for years, so I think it makes sense to have continuity. That would just be so I feel dedicated, part of it, so I'm willing to stay on it.
Yeah, and I feel the same way, because we worked on this before it became a committee even.
Okay.
And as for me, I used to be on parcel specific until last year. I think I dropped that last year and gave that to Commissioner Ramey. Yeah, I'd be interested in phase 2 chapters and maybe the 2001 subcommittee.
Okay.
So that means you would stay in the remaining chapters?
Unless there's I mean.
Okay. So I have you staying there, and then I also have for the House Bill 2001, whatever comes of that, I have Commissioners Taylor and Borofsky. Commissioner Beeson, would that be of interest to you, or any other commissioners? Just, not that we have an official formed committee, but, okay. Clear and objective. I think I've been involved in that. Commissioner Taylor, you said you were interested in that work as
I'm
well.
willing.
Let's see, we have a vacancy, so Commissioner Beeson, is that something you might be interested in?
I am interested in that. And
Okay.
again, I want to kind of defer and depending on who else is. But I think there's a good opportunity there for me. There's a lot of, I think, just to kind of learn about the code and be part of that process. I'm looking at that.
Okay, Commissioner Baker, you had a,
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, that's a group that it would, again, continuity would be useful because a lot of that information is very comprehensive process happened a while back, and it's useful to have that background. So, but it's good to have new blood as well, but I think that's another one where continuity, since it's, hopefully one of these days will wrap up, right?
well, I might suggest, because while I am involved in that process, I certainly am happy to step down and be an alternate if Commissioner Taylor, 'cause I know you've also been involved in that. If Commissioners Taylor and Beeson want to join Commissioner Baker in being kind of the 3 primary, and if Commissioner Ramey is still interested, he certainly can, but if that's a place where he'd like to kind of step away, I'd be happy to become the alternate. So does that sound good to both Commissioner Beeson and Commissioner Taylor?
Yeah, I'm open, so Commissioner Edwards, if you really want it, it's fine. I'm just willing to help out, just because I follow it, and then I am interested in House Bill 2001, and they're connected. Yeah.
No,
Okay.
I think it makes sense.
Okay, yep, it's fine.
Good.
So where did we land?
So Commissioners Baker, Taylor, and Beeson to serve the 3. And then as an alternate, for now, I'll leave it with Commissioner Ramey, and if when we connect, that's something I'm definitely willing to just continue to be an alternate for.
Yeah, do you mind, sorry.
No, sure, sorry.
One thing I know is that sometimes they loggerhead some of these committees will happen, there's a lot of demand. So alternates are helpful because some of us, I mean, we've got to work also. So I just want to say that because I'm on a few of these committees, which sometimes it works just fine, but sometimes they all end up being really active at the same time. So I appreciate alternates that can actually make sure they're tracking. So I just want, if people have a concern with that, then, or if staff does, more importantly. Yeah, okay, perfect.
The one thing I did just kind of notice, I don't know if maybe this isn't really, the Housing Tools and Strategies group had already met, and I believe that that work is completed. And that a lot of that is kind of rolling into other things. Is that something that?
I don't anticipate the working group will be reconvened.
Okay.
As you mentioned, several of the projects on this list, there's a lot of crossover.
Yeah.
Especially with HB 2001.
Okay.
I think it's probably safe to just assume that HB 2001 implementation will be kind of the new umbrella for several efforts.
Okay. We're almost there. So,
Question, you're right.
oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Fragala. So you have to hit me.
So are we adding an HB 2001 project resources or standing committee, or are we going to add
Yeah,
that?
I think we should just add it.
Because I would also be interested in participating in that. I thought we had 2 names, 3 names. I'm not clear because
Taylor and Borowski down already.
I do, correct.
I would be interested in being a third with that one.
I think that sounds very welcomed, so.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and just create that. And then on the future project resources, the area planning for university and the Bethel neighborhood plan, do we have any, I know we touched on this, but no real timeline.
After River Road is
Know of.
complete.
Okay.
Is the best timeline that I can give you. And so I think it's kind of in a hold. I don't, unless somebody wants off, I don't see a need to do anything with that one.
So that'd be my ask, if Commissioners Baker, Borowski, or Taylor are interested in stepping away from that. If not, we'll kind of maybe leave it as is and revisit it when we actually start that process. And it looks like the Bethel neighborhood plan is kind of in that same.
Yeah.
Okay.
The timing of this conversation is a little different than prior years as well, because we've usually looked at the work plan at the same time we're looking at these committees. And the work plan conversation is following a little bit behind because of the House Bill 2001 conversation and uncertainty around implementation of that.
Yes, okay.
But that will be forthcoming really soon.
Commissioner Fragala.
I'm just curious, we are required by law to implement, correct?
Yes, we are.
Okay,
It's absolutely our intent.
okay.
It's just mainly the question is how,
Yes, okay.
given all the work that we have in progress, how does it impact that work? How do we resource it? A lot of different questions that we've been working on and we'll be talking to council with as soon as we can. And then once they initiate that implementation, we'll be talking to you.
Okay, great. Perfect. Okay, well, I think unless anybody has any questions or comments on the committee liaisons, we can move to the third item in the agenda, which is a work session on the River Road Santa Clara neighborhood plan. So,
Great,
Terry
thank you.
Harding.
So I'm Terry Harding. I'm the principal planner for long-range planning and serving as interim project manager for River Road and Santa Clara. There's a whole horde of volunteers here today, which is really excellent. If John and Kate would come up, that would be really awesome. Kate has a few slides to go over, and John is the other co-chair. So Kate Purley and John Belcher, welcome to the table. You want to introduce yourselves at all?
I'm Kate Purley. I'm a resident of Santa Clara. I'm the chair of the Santa Clara Community Organization and co-chair of the Community Advisory Committee for the neighborhood planning process.
So I'm John Belcher, and I am co-chair of the River Road Community Organization and also CAC co-chair.
Great. So the last time this project was brought to the Planning Commission was in March, and it was at the conclusion of the policy development phase, and a lot of work has happened since then. So we're going to try to bring you up to speed, but mostly focus on hearing from members of the CAC that have been working through different topic areas and let them give you a flavor for what that's been like. We'll also give you an update on the corridor study. You might recall that we were awarded a grant from the Federal Transit Administration to study the River Road Transit Corridor. So there's a lot of work being done on that as well. Okay, so Kate's going to take over here for a little bit.
So this project is a collaboration of our two neighborhood organizations, the City of Eugene and Lane County. As you might know, a third of Santa Clara's neighborhood landmass lies outside the UGB, and we are working on planning that area as well because that's our neighborhood boundary, and those neighbors are expecting us to represent them as well. And the process began in October of 2017, and these are a couple slides of targeted outreach. We've been trying to make sure we're reaching members of our community who don't come to meetings, don't show up at neighborhood forums. And we've been, from the beginning, organizing the neighborhood planning process around a high level of neighborhood involvement and volunteerism, understanding that there had been a very long history of distrust between the neighborhoods and the municipalities, and understanding that were a neighborhood plan to be developed by somebody other than the neighbors and brought to the neighbors and asked, what do you think, that the level of probability of success would be pretty low. So this is the way our project is organized at this point. So in the very center, we have our project management team, which is made up of the city staff, county staff, and the two co-chairs from the two neighborhoods that serve on the Citizen Advisory Committee. And the circle right outside, so we meet, the expanded project management team meets every 2 weeks, ongoing. The Citizen Advisory Committee is the innermost circle, and that is made up of 11, at this point, 11 members of the two neighborhoods who've been meeting and working through this since the fall of 2017, and for some of us for a decade before, working on community priority setting, outreach, learning about our neighborhoods, concerns and interests, and bringing all that work into this process. The Community Advisory Committee has a monthly meeting standing and then does work outside of that. The next surrounding circle is the topic area working group. So the plan is divided into 5 separate topic areas, and each topic area has a certain number of goals and policies that fall within its purview. And each one of those goal statements that we have has what we call a goal keeper, which is somebody who's tasked with making sure that we're involving our neighborhood working groups and all of their individual concerns and talents and abilities, and bringing that work to that area. So those working groups meet sometimes monthly, depending on what we're doing, sometimes more intermittently, and they'd had a lot of work in developing policies and a lot of work in working on goals, and they've had a little bit of a hiatus in this last bit where we've been starting the action planning, and now we're about ready to go ahead and bring them back into the process in a formalized way for the action, wrapping up action planning and moving into implementation. And then on the outside of that, we have our general public. So at each phase of our process, we try to reach out to all of our residents. We have 32,000 residents in our two neighborhoods, and invite them to come and participate at whatever level they care to participate. All of the committees, the working groups and committees are available for people to step in and step out of. They don't have to make a firm commitment and stay involved at an expectation level. They can participate to whatever level suits their ability and time frame. And that's been a blessing for us to be able to have a wide variety of neighbors involved, but not making them feel like they couldn't make a commitment at the beginning because they weren't sure they could manifest it in the end. Yeah.
Would you prefer us to ask questions at the end, or do you mind if we ask questions as it's applicable?
We usually do clarifying questions throughout, that's fine.
Okay.
More content-rich at the end.
Yep, okay. Clarifying, you had mentioned something, and I know your neighborhoods and your committee's done a really good job. I think it's great for Planning Commission and the public to hear what you mentioned, that you do special reach, you outreach to neighbors that are underrepresented or can't attend. How are you doing that?
We have, on the project team, we have a contract with Cogito, which is a local firm that specializes in outreach, and they help us to do specific outreach. So we've had organized youth outreach with the North Eugene High School football team, and had the coach work with us, corralled them for an hour and a half, and ran through a whole bunch of scenarios with them. We go to some of our subsidized housing facilities in our neighborhoods and stand there on a day when they have food box pickup and intercept them where they are and with what they're doing. We've had specific outreach to the Latino community through help with Cogito with bilingual, to help us, get through those barriers, right? And some of that has happened specifically at schools. So River Road El Camino has a robust bilingual parent-teacher group, and they have opportunity for us to be there and communicate with. So I think the main thing is having enough help to be able to go out to where these communities are already meeting or conducting their lives, and being available to be there instead of expecting them to come to us.
I would just add, we've also gone to businesses and met with them at their place of work so they could have time to respond to us as well.
So at this moment, we are in the action planning phase at the bottom. So reaching out began in October of 2017. Started with a great big kickoff meeting at North Eugene High School. We had over 400 neighbors attend that particular event. And then we transitioned into a neighborhood visioning process so that we knew that our plan was going to have these different topic areas, and each topic area needed a vision. And so we started that process, and that went through spring of 2018. In summer of 2018, we switched over to our neighborhood priorities phase, and that's another one of those great big events where we invited all the neighbors to come. So we do that through mailings that the city helps us pay for to invite every address in our neighborhood, through neighborhoods volunteering, individual neighbors volunteering at the doorway of Fred Meyer and Grocery Outlet, and asking people to come and reminding them about the event, through yard signs that were provided to us through our work with the city that we placed in strategic spots all over the neighborhood, through incredibly robust email process that Carlene Riley has been developing over the years with neighbors as a way to keep them informed about the process. And through straight up door knocking, making flyers, asking people to go around, go talk to 20 people. Everybody talk to 20 people, and to do that. So we've had pretty good coverage that way. The June events we divided into 2 days because over 400 people became really cumbersome to deal with. We had about 250 people show up, and then we had targeted outreach and an online version that people could connect with. So we had another 150 people at that phase of it. Then we moved into our policy development phase in fall of 2018. And that was primarily those working groups we talked about. So maybe 70 residents who have not an every week kind of level of interest, but very specific interests in different parts of the plan, things that touch on their lives or things they care about, that they really want to work through the nuts and bolts and be part of the detail-oriented work, not just, blanket statements about, we love our character. They want to actually get into the meat of it and help us figure out what to do. And Commissioner Fragel, you came to one of those working group meetings, right? So we showed up with the goals, and the working group members designed the policies. So under this goal, this is what we think is important. This is what we've heard from our neighbors in these other events. This is how we think we could organize that. And so it's been a long slog through policy development, but it culminated in like a policy roundup we had in December, where Robin was there, and I think you were there again, right? And so that was looking at all of our goals and policies, but looking at them across themes. So instead of just land use, transportation, community, parks and natural resources, and looking at everything in those silos, looking at it as the theme of the river. Where does that touch on land use? Where does that touch on resource? Where does that touch on community building? And then, another theme about safety. Where does that touch in these groups? And trying to organize the policies in a different way to see if there were gaps that we needed to fill and places where there was overlap where we didn't need to have it everywhere, and trying to figure it out that way. And now we're into action planning, and that is started in spring of 2019 up till today. And we could go to the next slide, because that's really the next slide, is the action planning check-in with our neighbors happened in some April events. So we had another big community forum send out for people to come to 2 days in April. And we separated all the goals by table. So whereas other events that we've had it kind of orchestrated how people would move from place to place and when they would go. This was giving people an opportunity to self-select to do work in the things they cared most about. So there would be a goal per table, and at each table there were all the policies, and then there were example actions to implement those policies, and asking people to respond to that and be able to really dig into some detail. And if they wanted a little bit more framework for it, on the walls, not at the table, were all the actions and all the policies to date. So they could, because policies tend not to be so terribly specific, to be able to inform your comments on a policy, you kind of have to know what the actions are to be able to dial that language in better. So that was our 2 April events, and we had approximately 225 people show up for that. The other part that was interesting about that event is we also had other tables. We had a table devoted entirely to the corridor study, and we had a table that just LTD had, because a lot of our transportation goals and ideas also incorporate public transit or bike and ped, so there were opportunities to involve other service providers in our area to be able to inform people's choices and thoughts on it. And now we're at a point where we're doing an online survey. So there's a neighborhood survey, and nestled in that is a corridor survey as a tool to be able to get some feedback from community members on specific actions and how they, whether they think that we're going in the right direction, basically. It's a confirm or adjust sort of period for us. And so we're working on trying to figure out how to best drive a lot of people to a survey that's very complex and takes a fair amount of time to get through. But I think a half hour is not an inconsiderable amount of time for somebody to sit there and take a survey. And I think to do it in a really conscientious and deliberate way, it probably takes somebody that long. So far, we've had 300 people who've gotten all the way through the survey, and we're working on moving that along.
Thanks, Kate.
Uh-huh.
Any other clarifying questions for Kate? Okay. There's still a ton more content, so I want to keep going.
Yeah.
So as Kate mentioned, the group is really in the action planning phase right now, but I wanted to call to your attention the fact that in May, this work was brought to both the City Council and the Board of County Commissioners for a check-in on the policy work to date. And both bodies approved that as a basis for moving into action planning. So it's not formal adoption, it's direction, and a really, really important check-in with the electeds on this project, which was part of the intent from the very beginning to bring people along and keep checking in to make sure that the project's on the right track. So that happened in May for both groups, and then there have been a corridor study in June that we'll talk about a little bit more. There's been a working group meeting in late May, and there have been CAC meetings plus side meetings with their working group members, and lots of technical advisory review as different actions are tested for feasibility and cost and what's it really going to take to do this thing. And really today, my hope was to have a little bit more informal conversation with the Planning Commission because action planning is not done yet. We're at a point in the process where all these folks are working really hard and eyes on the prize of getting to an actual recommendation that the Community Advisory Committee hopes to make early fall and then share that with everyone again. So you will have another meeting, an opportunity to hear about their recommendations in full, hoping for November. A little bit more on that timeline later also. So for reports on the in-progress actions, here's a reminder on what's in the plan: economic development, transportation, parks and natural resources, land use, and community. Those are the topics. And there are goal keepers assigned to each of 18 goals underneath all of these 5 topics. So the first one, I don't know if we have anybody in the audience from economic development, but there are 3 goals related to economic development, and some of the actions being considered by the group have to do with growing home-based businesses in the neighborhood. This is something that has resonated with a lot of folks. And of course, it's a balance between making it easier to work at home and bring more economic activity to the neighborhoods and maintaining neighborhood livability in terms of traffic and impacts of a lot of customers. But the nugget of the idea here is to amend the land use code. This would be a code amendment idea to make home-based businesses easier in a way that fits with the other goals of the neighborhood plan. The other one that has been resonating is to establish a local business network, and this is something that the local volunteers will implement. It's not a city or a county action. A land use code is. So there's a difference in kind of how different policy outcomes are implemented, and this is a pretty good illustration of how different they can be. In the end, there will be a very detailed matrix that identifies whether the action is a code amendment or not, who is going to implement it, how much it costs, and all of that work is in progress and far too big of a spreadsheet to share with you right now. For now, these are the highlights. And these are in the survey that's out for public input right now. Clarifying question?
Yes. So I'm just going to repeat what you just said, which I think was great because that was going to be my question, is it sounds like with these actions, you will have that follow-up, who's responsible. So it's really clear that this is really a neighborhood kind of action rather than a city council or staff or a planning commission, et cetera. The other one, home-based, just assuming that means businesses within the home on a residential property.
Right.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions on economic development? Okay.
I guess maybe this is kind of a clarifying question, but so you're talking about goal number 1.
1, 2, and 3.
1, 2, and 3. And when I was going through this, all of the kind of the subsets on each goal are the policy statements. And then the subsets of each one of those are your action statements, right? Okay, and then you're highlighting 2. action statements out of this. And one of the questions I had was kind of, and it sounds like you're just in the process of doing that work for implementation, is how it's all going to be prioritized. But this is kind of suggesting some priority out of
Right.
2.5 pages here.
Right. So it's a way to give you an example of things that are
Okay.
being talked about and are rating highly when they're discussed with the community. But yeah, the actual ranking of each item is in progress and it's not complete yet. The thought is to prioritize so that
Right.
when the group is ready to bring a full recommendation forward, it is clear what's being asked for.
Okay.
For instance, with land use code amendments, council needs to initiate a process. And so that would be made clear, and funding needs to be made available to implement that item. An item like establish a local business network is implemented by the community, and so it can start tomorrow as long as there's a community champion to do it. And that's another whole aspect of
Well, that's
the work.
helpful. So I'll let you go
Yeah.
ahead because that kind of
Okay.
helps.
So may I add something? You've hit on an important point in my mind, Commissioner Breesen, and that is we have some 150 action items.
You do.
And trying to get informed feedback from the public is a challenge. We haven't quite figured out how to do that yet, but we thought we would start with some of the bigger, more supported issues and start getting feedback there rather than flooding people with a fire hose and expecting them to be able to respond. But more to come on that.
Okay. Well, that makes sense, and that helps me. I understand how you're doing it.
So I had a question on economic development and in particular the home-based businesses and how you're working this out between the jurisdictions, especially in Santa Clara, where we have urban rural interfaces. And I know that there's a lot of people that are interested in, more agricultural business type things, a farm stand, an agritourismo, a brewery on a thing. So I'm wondering how you're implementing that, one, between state land use codes, county land use codes, and city land use codes. I see that as an opportunity, but I also see that as a
Challenge.
that would be a word
One
for
word.
Under,
So I mean, I guess the question would be is, you're talking about doing code amendments here, but if people outside of the UGB in Santa Clara are thinking that this is a planning thing as well, is the same attention given to county code as well? And do you think that there's going to be buy-in from county? And if so, would it just, if county's making a code change, can they make it just to a specific area, or would it be countywide?
A good question for the county. No, that's a joke. That's a joke. They're very involved, and the answer is any code amendment inside the UGB is administered and adopted by the city, and we have an IGA to administer that. Anything outside the UGB is controlled by the county. And so it'll show up again on the land use slide, or maybe it's the natural resources slide when we talk about ag land. And we're still working on it. These home-based business ones are intended to talk about land inside the UGB.
But we are scheduled to meet with the county planning commission as well soon.
Okay.
I get that question a lot. Okay, we go on? Okay. Transportation, we do have a transportation goalkeeper in the room. Ann Vaughn is right here. Hi, Ann. Ann and a couple others have been working on transportation, and you can see the highlights here focus in on bicycle and pedestrian facilities, especially near schools and parks. One of the ideas is to support projects that have long been on lists, like in the transportation system plan, but they haven't had any funding identified yet. And one of those is a pedestrian and bicycle bridge over Beltline to connect Santa Clara to the North Eugene High School. So that's an example of one that's in there that we're including in the survey and getting feedback on. Another one has to do with Beltline Highway and reducing traffic congestion, and all of the projects associated with that are on a separate public involvement process, including the Division Avenue Bridge. Just a whole lot of work being done by probably 4 different transportation agencies that affect these 2 neighborhoods. So this plan is attempting to consider all of those and ask the community to help prioritize or express their level of support for different areas of priority. Then we also have adoption of new street standards that allow for street side drainage, natural drainage, for all the benefits that can bring. And one that's not on the slide but is very important to everyone is safety, both along River Road itself and major side streets like Hunsaker. There have been some pretty bad, there have been fatalities on Beaver Hunsaker in the neighborhood, and so that's a huge concern for all of the residents and the agencies involved in this plan. Did I miss anything, Ann?
No, I think basically one of the things is connectivity for transportation, all modes of transportation, especially in Santa Clara. The area feels a little isolated from the bike paths and the bike system throughout the city, and so one of the areas identified is to continue the bike path up along the river and connect it to the other bike paths so that it can be used. And also, there really aren't any defined routes throughout Santa Clara and in some areas of River Road. So we'd like to have those routes defined and labeled so that people can become familiar with easier ways to get around.
I have a question about, when we talked about this a little earlier, knowing that there's the Moving Ahead project and Transit Tomorrow, I'm curious as how this work is intersecting with that. Maybe that's not easy.
I would say it is. Just several folks in the audience that are tracking that on behalf of the neighborhood. At the staff level, it's very closely coordinated, but I know it is in the community as well. And like, for instance, the River Road Community Organization brought the Moving Ahead team to their last meeting, and they're trying to coordinate recommendations and input across projects. That's been, I think, actually great about this project is it raises the profile of the neighborhood plan to have so many other things going on at the same time that we can build on and leverage.
Okay, great.
But it does create challenges if that action plan for moving ahead or whatever isn't in sync with our action plan for improvements that might be associated with that. How are we going to work through that? Time will tell.
Caroline, do you want to grab a microphone? Harlene's been helping organize volunteers throughout this project.
I think the most important coordinating feature is that the Community Advisory Committee for the River Road Corridor Study and for the neighborhood plan is the same people. So they are taking all of this information in and they can integrate it right there rather than having different committees communicating with one another.
Any other questions? Right, Terry.
Okay,
You're on.
transportation. Thank you. Parks and Natural Resources. I saw Hans Wittig enter the room. Hans is one of the goalkeepers in this area. And sorry, my notes got all mixed up, so hold on just a sec. There we go. So okay, Hans, take it away.
Okay, well, I'm actually only one of the 4 goals. I'm on the natural resources, but it's more related to the first item up there. But for the natural resources, the main areas were protecting or addressing stormwater conveyances. It was related to the other one about stormwater and sidewalks, but that came up as a priority in terms of the community, in terms of looking at those and making sure that they're protected. Some are already protected, but there are many who are not protected. And so that, along with identifying habitat corridors, just areas that are, where there's wooded areas and such within the neighborhoods, and how there'd be some connectivity between habitat corridors, as well as looking at tree canopy and planting trees. But in our area, it's a little bit different. Like some things could be peripherally addressed by code, but a lot of this is really can be implemented just through working with some existing organizations like the Long Tom Watershed Council and or Friends of Trees. And a lot of it is really through education because these landowners have, they might be on these waterways. And really the best way to, address that and protect them is to actually talk to them and provide some education in terms of how they would handle that or knowing what they even have in their backyards or providing them with, vegetation to help replant those areas to protect them even better. So I think there's a lot here that's like easier to implement right away because the resources are outside of code, or there are some things the city could do too, like where they could inform a new landowner, property owner, and tell them as well that they're next to a protected resource and the things they can or cannot do alongside that.
Oh, Commissioner Borowski.
Just a comment about that, and one of the other things that we dealt with earlier was some tree standards and in clearing objectives and in other things. And so I'm just wanting to know, are you going to try and dovetail those in? Because I would hate to have tree standards for all of the city one thing and then River Road tree standards be different. Do you see that as, I mean, I understand the concerns and
Yeah.
near, when it's near goal 5, that's one thing, but if it's, a piece of property in River Road and it's a private piece of property, they should be able to develop that under the same tree standards as other areas, or do you think it will be special?
Well, my understanding is the Clear and Objective is a citywide project, and that would apply in River Road as well. And this action is more about voluntary tree planting. It's not to change the code.
And I guess that's what I would want to convey to you folks, is that there is a path going forward as far as clear and objective standards for all kinds of things and tree things. So let your people know that just because you've got these tree standards or whatever, these special standards for voluntary or whatever, that if a developer comes in and decides to use clear and objective as their
There's lots of trees being cut down.
right, no, but
It's more like
again,
encouraging planting. It was
Yeah.
more like, hey, we're going to plant 1,000 trees this year or something.
what I'm saying is just make, have it being a two-way street, letting them know that, okay, this is what we're aiming for, but that doesn't usurp what a property owner may be able to do, so that they're not upset when they say, hey, we've got an area plan that says you've got to do this, just so that it's a back and forth, so that they're not, looking at it through one lens when there's actually two. That's what I'm hoping for.
More than 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was gonna add that there might be some differences between tree planting in River Road and other parts of the city, because you're generally in a wetter, there's more wetland areas, and so you might actually, our general standards, it might very well be that some of those trees would not be appropriate and other trees would be more appropriate for the particular conditions that exist in River Road. So I don't necessarily think that it would be uniform. There may be some selection of what parts of the code.
That goes with the education part. We want to incentivize the tree planting and what's appropriate. And so that kind of goes along with the education, because it really will encourage homeowners to do that, knowing that the things that they're planting will actually be appropriate for the neighborhood.
John, you had a comment.
Yeah, Commissioner Borowski, you bring up another big overarching point, which is, do we do things differently in River Road? Are some of our ideas really better attuned to looking at the city as a whole? That, again, is something we'll have to work through. A particular case is House Bill 2001. We're talking about standards for middle housing in our neighborhood. At the same time, the city is looking at standards for middle housing throughout the city. How are those two going to dovetail? That's a challenge. And it's exacerbated by the fact there's some people in River Road who've already said it won't do any good. Once you make this plan, they'll immediately throw it out. Well, with House Bill 2001, that may actually be the case, not due to anything the city's done, but a challenge for us and the city as a whole. So these are things we have to look at.
The last item on this list is about making it easier to sell agricultural produce on site, and Kate's been working on that one, so I didn't know if you want to add anything about that. It's both inside and outside the UGB, correct?
It's primarily for inside the UGB because there's, so I think the interest is that people inside the UGB want to be able to aggregate products from 3 or 4 of their neighbors and be able to sell it at a stand instead of, because the lots are small enough that perhaps they don't have a breadth of product available. But the code only allows the person to sell what they grew on their own property. And so that's one of those places where we've heard from a lot of neighbors that, oh, we would love to be able to do this. Why can't we do this? So that's one of the, and outside the UGB, you're welcome to sell whatever you want. The only code restrictions are on driveways, how far apart are, like access for your stand, how close is it to the road, standard code provisions like that. So, and I would just add one thing, that the natural areas on private land is, a lot of that, as Hans was mentioning, is about our waterways. And our waterways are our infrastructure. We don't have piped waterways out there in much of our landscape like everyone else does. And a lot of those were divided up as homes before the city was involved. And so some of them don't even have an easement, or they're not, the city can't get in and do anything, or the private property owner doesn't understand that it's part of a larger watershed and that actually this drains to the Willamette. And so as a way to navigate all, but whether it's city, whether it's county, whether the city has an easement, whether the county, whether there's any kind of even power easement that allows someone to go in there, is all things we have to pick apart, because the city's uses one computer system, the county uses a different computer system, and a lot of these properties aren't even in the counties. They're private, the utility easement or isn't even recorded with the property in their computer. So we have to go back and figure out how to, anyway, that's part of the, and so that's why we say instead of a regulatory municipal solution, maybe the best solution is to inform the people, empower the people that are living along these, and through work and help and plants, and create a voluntary program where it builds its own momentum and can start small and get larger. So, yeah.
And moving on to land use. This is John's slide, so I'll let him talk about this one.
Yeah, these are some of the thematic actions being considered by the CAC. As I mentioned, there's some 150 action items. A third of them are in land use. So this is not everything, but it's some of the bigger themes. For example, number 1, site middle housing zoning between single family and both multifamily and C2 with infill and transition standards to support compatible design. The idea of using different housing types to step down from those higher intensity developments to the lower ones. Not necessarily just there, but that being a theme. And again, House Bill 2001 is sort of in the background there. And then we're also concerned about the Willamette Greenway. So we're concerned about how we also step down as we move towards the Willamette Greenway as well, with height limits, slope setbacks, buffering standards to be determined. Number 3, removing financial and land use code barriers to innovative and creative housing options. That sounds like the housing options group as well, but we're very concerned about making sure that there are a wide range of options in our neighborhoods, which are primarily single-family housing, and that's not the nature of the people who live there in general. We're not big families. We're a lot of couples and singles living in single-family homes, so that's a concern we have. Number 4, form-based codes. That's a big lift. We'll see how that one works out. And then finally, using the corridor study, we have professionals who are helping us design code, which you'll see later, to give us an opportunity to provide feedback, and that's a good place to test those themes. Well, we'll talk about that later. I don't want to get into too much detail, but this is a place to start to work through those 55.
have a question. I know that the multifamily C2 zoning, we've had those conversations here about those transition standards. We've talked about that, but where would the Willamette Greenway, where would that be addressed? Is that state or is that something?
Well, I believe it's in our code, though there is a state land use goal that
Right.
says we have to establish a Willamette Greenway ordinance. To be honest, our experience is it hasn't been too effective in controlling how development occurs near the river. So we're anxious in opening that up and taking a look. The challenge is that most of River Road has already been developed, so there's not much opportunity for change there. Most of Santa Clara's area that's in the Greenway is outside the urban growth boundary. So those are two challenges we're going to have to work with.
I would just add that the Greenway is a statewide issue and our code applies citywide, but there is precedent for adopting neighborhood-specific standards along the Greenway. Both Portland and Albany have a sloped setback requirement in the south waterfront of Portland has a specific development line that form-based sloped setback that development has to fit within adjacent to the Willamette River. And so we've studied that, looked at that, thought about whether that's something appropriate for this part. That's pretty much all residential throughout River Road. That could be an implementation item from this plan and wouldn't have to necessarily apply throughout the city.
Helpful. Shabrowski.
Good work. The question I had would be on, I guess it could go to several of these, but mostly to number 5 and working in the corridor study. So part of Envision Eugene was to intensify along corridors. Have you looked at incentives as part of your planning? I mean, for me, I think that incentivizing mixed use and multi, maybe use some sort of a MUPD, having that type of a ask from the city council may be appropriate. I know MUPD's been used in the downtown core area. It was used in the university area and not to its best extent, but downtown one just got passed, and I'm just wondering, has there been talk of incentivizing the corridor?
Some of our action items include the use of incentives, but to be honest, until we know what we want to do, we haven't started talking about incentives yet.
Okay.
Part of as an addition to that, part of the corridor study, and this is again kind of weaving the corridor study scope into the larger neighborhood plan, which is a lot bigger geographically. The work that's scoped for the corridor study itself includes testing different incentives like MUPD or SDC waivers, and testing new code that is being developed as what is the impact of code changes and incentives on likelihood of certain development types. And that's being done through a tool called Mapcraft, and we don't have results yet, but they're starting to be produced and discussed at a subcommittee of the CAC that's dealing with the corridor study technical work. There's a whole lot there, but it is, I think, very important for us to learn as a city how those incentives affect development potential along River Road, and then what can we learn about other corridors from that.
And one of the reasons I bring it up is because I see this as a real opportunity to take the stigma away from MUPD. I mean, if you had a neighborhood a neighborhood that's buying into it, that it says, this is what we want, and isn't going to stand up, when somebody comes up and says, hey, I'd like to get a tax incentive to build something nice along River Road, or, a block off of River Road, and that's something that the neighborhood is looking for, it may help take some of the stigma away from these incentives, because the incentives have just got a very bad name at the city. And so if we can have a neighborhood that is working for it and buying into it, that may help incentives be embraced citywide.
Right. Terry made a good point. Having the ability to look at the current economics of something as whether it can be built or not, and then being able to come back and say, well, in order to make that happen, these are the things we'd like you to consider, and we have a carrot to go with it. We're well aware of that opportunity.
Okay, we have one more set of actions, and then we have a whole bunch of stuff on the corridor study. So for community, Jerry Finnegan is here, and as a resource, he's been working on the goal having to do with public services, the last bullet. But the items under the goal area or topic area community are kind of across three themes, I would say. There's multicultural outreach and hate and bias kind of topics. There are community resilience and sustainability type items. And then there are these service provision kinds of issues and governance issues. And that's the one that Jerry's been mostly involved with.
And I'll talk to that first. I can try to answer questions on the other ones later. There are actually 4 goals. I was involved in Goal 17. If you look at the list of CAC members, I'm not there. It's because I helped choose the CAC, but because I was so instrumental in getting this process off the ground for the last decade, I wanted to step back, which worked okay until they got to the services issue, and they said, you know, Jerry's the only one that can do that. And so that's the reason I'm into that. But basically what we did in Goal 17 was decide that we were not going to deal with the issue of annexation. And that's something that we did clear back and scroll and script as well, that annexation is really probably a possible implementation tool for services. And so it might work in some, might work or not work in others. So services were basically concerned with what happens in the services over the next 20 years. Will they be transformed into a single governing entity, which we expect will happen? But we didn't address that. We simply talked about how we like services to be kind of not a problematic thing like it is right now for people in River Road, Santa Clara. And so there's a recommendation that people have. We thought about an actual call center or call person, but then we thought, well, it's probably too expensive. But a publication where people know who is servicing them. Right now in Santa Clara, there are 4 school districts, 3 special service districts, and the city and the county. And so eventually those will unify, and so our goals are basically talking about making sure that people are clear about who they're servicing them, about making sure that this transition is smooth and that there's no holes left where people are not do not have service, and that in the end services are not really an issue like they are right now. As far as the other goals are concerned, these are really not code items. They're basically, the city will be probably dealing with, for instance, the racism and discrimination issue, but probably each neighborhood will also have to have this in their neighborhood plan, because without it being in the plan and protected by the neighborhood organizations, then it becomes, it just gets left out. And so things like racism, discrimination is there. The view or the overall vision of the community is probably what every community wants. But with River Road and Santa Clara, we have a lot more open space, which may be probably not so much so after infill, but this allows for a lot of green protection, stream protection, and that kind of thing. And so there's that, and then there's the idea. Well, there's 31,000 people out there. The idea that how do you get a community feeling and get community developed? And so again, that's probably not a code issue. It's probably more a neighbor community issue. And then the resiliency plans is is really the whole application of disaster preparedness, but also taking advantage of all the well, we have some of the best soil in the nation, and taking advantage of that soil and getting people to realize that they have that asset. So I guess that's what I.
Questions for Jerry?
Just as far as bringing in all the different service providers and coordinating those as time goes on over the next 20 years, do you have a kind of like a preferred providers? I mean, to me, I know that somebody from eWeb brought up to me the fact that, you know, streetlights on this street are serviced by one provider, and then on the next street they're serviced by another provider. And, you know, obviously people don't want to give up their livelihood in some of these smaller districts. Same thing with water. But I mean, do you kind of have a plan saying, hey, you know, eWeb's basically the player for the whole rest of the city? You know, if water's going to transition, let's go to this. If fire's going to transition, it should go to the city of Eugene. Is there a prioritization of that, or is it just an overarching goal to kind of bring them in?
We were, in researching this, we got together with the fire chiefs of Lane Rural and Eugene, and we said, you know, we want to make sure that there's a smooth transition. We found out after talking to them, they've already made that transition. There's a very smooth transition, and there's no ambiguity about fire service and who provides it. Santa Clara Fire Department, or Volunteer Fire Department, now is pretty much an integral part of Lane Rural, which is also an integral part of Eugene. That's a good service model, and so we're kind of hoping that will happen also in things like policing and water. And water and electric is, well, we've got 2 water boards still after, you know, it's kind of a vestigial effect of clear back when. And that doesn't make a lot of sense, but, you know, how that will integrate, I don't know. I'm guessing with water that the water boards who works through eWeb will be faced with some crises like some kind of electronic monitoring of water meters and stuff that they can't afford, and so you know, John.
I happen to wear the hat of being on the River Road Water District Board as well, so I do have a little more information. We have program for the electronic monitoring, but you know, a lot of our time is spent discussing with eWeb when a pipe breaks whose responsibility it is. I'm not sure that's the most efficient use of their time or our time. But I would point out that the other role that the River Road Water District provides is we receive assessments to pay for our fire services because we don't have a fire department. So if the water board were to go away, which may be logical for efficiency perspectives, who's going to be collecting that money for fire? It gets complicated very quickly.
That's not the same issue in Santa Clara. The Santa Clara Water Board is it just does water.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jerry.
Commissioner Taylor had a question.
So can you kind of lead us, because I'm recognizing there's 25 minutes, like if we have some suggestions, observations, should we still wait till the end or split between corridor and?
Yeah, I guess now would probably be a good time to pause if you have any questions of the neighborhood volunteers that are here. Not that they're not working on the corridor study, but it's pretty dense, and the next chunk of the presentation is about that, so it's probably a logical time.
I've got a couple more observations about the plan, if I may.
Yeah.
First of all, I think you're mostly aware that we lost both of our primary staff people early in the process, which has created a real challenge. The existing staff has stepped up well, but there's still work to be done. For example, we haven't worked through how our entire decision process will occur. So Terry and I are working with a proposal to take back to the CAC to make that done, but you need to be aware we don't have every nut and bolt set yet. And the other one is that, in my opinion, this is a rather ambitious timeline. having been on the planning commission for 13 years, I know how these things work out. We are trying to walk that fine line between maintaining the interest of our neighbors and making sure we get it right. But I just want to share that concern.
Thank you. Commissioner Taylor.
Well, I just want to express how I say this every time, and I really want to say it again, because I really appreciate your thoughtfulness in cross-referencing, for instance, the example of, and kind of checks and balances, of looking at the policies, and then you're cross-referencing it with like the river and safety. Your example you just gave about fire services, your inclusion of all of the various neighborhood kind of entities, including underrepresentation. So I really, really appreciate and commend you, and I'm excited that this is the pilot, quite frankly, and I know there's always challenges when you're dealing with something as complicated as this. And there are moving parts, like staff members that you can't really project or anticipate. So it sounds like your group is maintaining an active level of involvement, which is impressive also over all these years. So I just want to commend you, and I appreciate your comprehensive kind of overview of this. I'm excited to see the next steps. The other thing is I've seen, a user of a lot of these plans, adoptive plans, and the code. I'm always looking for, do you have language that's actually going to get you, if it's used, get you to where you want to go? So I have this critical eye always, because you put in all this work and the wording isn't quite right, you could end up with unintended consequences, for instance. So I definitely kind of watch that. So I've noticed that from your policies to actions, it seems like you've gotten a lot clearer in kind of your language. I did notice one, so just keep on that. And once again, Planning Commission will pay attention to that, as well as staff. Definitely, that's something I pay attention to, is, for instance, improve Bethel facilities. I know you had, or not Bethel, Beltline facilities reduce traffic congestion. Do you mean vehicular traffic? Do you mean multi-mode? Just where you can in your action, your words, go through and you really have done an excellent job. I've noticed that as you move through, is that you're getting clearer and clearer. So it's awesome. Great job.
Dabrowski?
Again, it's phenomenal, the work that you guys have done, and I'm looking at it as a template for other neighborhood plans, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. And this is kind of going to staff. I heard a couple of things at the presentation today about resources. Ken might get this because he was on budget for a long time. So, you mentioned contract with Cogito, mailings, yard signs, these types of things. I'm hoping that staff is keeping track of a budget that, some of this was probably paid for by the corridor grant, possibly, but it's going to be important when I'm looking at this as a template and moving forward. So then when you say, okay, next is university area plan. And when you go to council and say, you know what, outreach and these types of things cost us this much money, 80,000, 100,000, whatever it is, you can build that into the ask from the budget when you go to say, okay, we're going to do university plan, and it's going to cost this much in staff time, but it's also going to cost this much to do a corrective outreach. And so I hope that we're keeping track of those dollars in that type of a thing. Obviously, it's going to be not apples to apples, because this is a huge area, and mailings to River Road Santa Clara is going to be much larger than mailings to South University and Amazon and Fairmont. But some of these other outreach things, because I want to be able to get 250 people into South Eugene, just like you got 400 people into North Eugene when it comes down for the next one. So that's what I'm asking of staff, to make sure that we have a dollars and cents thing that goes with this as well.
Yeah, and just to confirm, we do track all staff time that goes into it, and we also track all material expenses. We've set up a pretty clear system of codes that are attached to all those expenses so we can run reports on that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Commissioner Fragala?
So I just wanted to say that getting to participate in this process has been a real highlight for me as a commissioner. It's been very robust, and even though I think we look at it as a template, which is, I think, really important, I also want to recognize the unique nature of the community and the leadership that your team has brought to this process. And thank you very much for your work. I've enjoyed it greatly when I've been able to participate. I was also thinking the same thing that Commissioner Borofsky was thinking. I think when we begin to think about moving on to other neighborhoods, the ability to access resources to do this really well is essential. And Kate mentioned lots of examples of where that was critical to engage the community, as well as the reason why we want to do that. Communities, when they see it from the grassroots up, are going to respond much more collaboratively. And I'd also like to recognize John's comment about the disruption to the process by, having an interruption to the support, and acknowledging that again, we need to make sure these processes are well-resourced. I did have a question about, I know we want to get to the corridor study, but I noticed throughout the process how adeptly and empathetically you dealt with the annexation issue, and that issue is very emotionally charged. The times that I was present, you kept indicating that this might be something that would come up as part of the action item discussion. And so I'm curious, has it continued to come up, and how that might impact the process around the action items? I know it's a very emotionally charged issue.
It always comes up in
Yeah.
our neighborhood,
Yeah.
You can't talk about change without the A word, as
Yeah.
we call it. And we just keep telling them, it's a tool for implementing certain ideas. If those ideas don't resonate with the neighborhood, then there's no need to implement that idea.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a crystal ball. We can't tell you what the future will bring. We do know that there are certain services that are provided in our neighborhood by the city, such as park services, purchasing of park land, that everybody gets to enjoy regardless of whether you're annexed or not. And there are other services that are provided by the districts, or that other people, if the Santa Clara Fire Station holds a barbecue, everyone can come. They don't say if you're a city resident, you can't be there, right? So there's this give and take, and our service providers have been protecting and providing our neighborhood with essential services for perpetuity, for as long as we've all been there. So you can't be a neighbor versus a service provider, because all your neighbors are service providers in one way or another. They might work for the city, they might work for Santa Clara Fire, right? So it's just about, everybody has to move forward together. How everything gets parsed will happen over time, and pretending that we can manifest a clear and discrete way and deliberate way of doing that in all these situations at the same time with the same level of care is not reasonable. So that's what we say. The future is coming, whether you're annexed or not. Let's all get on board with creating what we want, and let's sort those things out when they bubble up to the surface later, because that's the best we can do.
The other thing I would add is that as we have this discussion, we point out that this neighborhood plan is a great way to identify where those issues are and clarify what potential ways to resolve them are. And perhaps the next step after completing the plan is an annexation discussion. But we've done our best to make sure that people don't feel that this is a backdoor route to annexation,
Yeah,
because
I
it's
think
not.
you've done very well with that, and when the times I've been present, so thank you.
More questions?
I just have one quick question. So early on, and this is directly related to the neighborhood that I live in, and then it will be coming up hopefully in the next neighborhood planning, was the distrust issue. You know, River Road Santa Clara had a long history of not antagonism towards city planning. And I believe we have that in some of our neighborhoods as well. There's factors. So what worked best to get people to trust the city and trust the planning process?
Well, I wouldn't characterize it as like we've completely put
Right.
that in the rear view
Okay.
for everybody, but I would say,
No, or help bring them along.
right, so it's a hard thing to tell you, but I think it's time spent really, because before the beginning of our project in October 2017, we, the neighbors, had been working for a long time, and Zach Galloway, who was our project leader, had been putting in time, coming to our scroll and script meetings, getting to know exactly the tenor of what our neighbors were thinking, how they solved problems, what lens they viewed all these challenges through. So when we started this process, we already had great trust in Zach, and Zach had great trust in us as being able to be ambassadors for the rest of our neighborhood. And working that way, the more we can trust who's being brought to the table by the city or the county, the greater we can be advocates for alleviating some of the mistrust and tension and misunderstanding, and it can ripple out that way, right? So that's like the worst and the best possible answer is that you can make it yourself, but the flip side of that is it takes time.
Great, thank you.
If I may add once again, I think the issues in Santa Clara and River Road are more based on an incident from 25 years ago, which really wasn't a land use incident. It was the city trying to require annexation over the sewers construction. So that's a little different. But I think there is a common answer, and that is we've done our best, and I think we've honestly said we are equal partners. We initiated this process. This is the neighborhood's plan, not the city's plan.
I'm sorry, can my observation, and actually the critical piece, is thanks for modeling collaboration, inclusion, honesty, clear information, meaning there's overlap and kind of elimination of false information, and having venues of multiple kind of outreach. So thank you, because I think that is what it's going to take. And it doesn't totally eliminate it, yet there's outlet, and you're modeling it. Great community leadership. Thank you.
And I just want to say, it takes basically an army of people, because at every one of our outreach contacts with our community, it's tempting to say, oh, let's just let Cogito do the outreach. Let's just let the city go around to the businesses. We realize that without a resident heading that up every single time, being the person at the door, that the message gets misconstrued. The city wants to plan our neighborhood for us, right? So just to be clear, it's the 32,000 residents out there need the 2,000 residents who are willing to put in the hours and be at all those events every time we go out there, because that makes a huge difference in how they're received.
All right, Terry.
Thank you so much. For the city's part, I think it's a lot about attitude, honestly, and supporting a process, and helping, doing our best to help implement a neighborhood vision. So things like the annexation calculator that the city has put online to allow anybody who lives in an unannexed area to calculate what their taxes would be if they annex, that's available. It's been online for several years now on the city website, and those are updated annually. Just an example. Okay, so we're going to not have enough time to go through all of this, but I'll preface it by saying there are 2 surveys online, and the neighborhood plan survey includes questions about each of the 5 topic areas, including several questions about the corridor study. And then there's a second survey, which gets really detailed about the corridor study itself. Julie Fisher from Cogito has been heading up the outreach for the plan and wrote and developed the neighborhood plan survey with input from all of the goalkeepers. And we were at over 300 responses, as Kate said earlier, with a fairly high level of support. Just a real sneak preview that Julie printed out for me beforehand is that on average, all of the actions that are being asked about in the survey are rating at 70% or higher, either agree with implementing the action or strongly agree. So we'll have full details for you of all of the survey results, but that's a little sneak preview.
And you could take the survey. That would be
yes.
your best learning tool. You just go to riverroad-santaclaraplan.org. Take the survey. Click on that.
Perfect. Go. Thank you, Kate. I'm going to skip through this. I think you already know about the early February workshop. This was kind of idea generation, including this map of different centers along River Road. North is to the left on this map. You can also see a purple line that's imagined as a walking and biking route around the neighborhood and connecting to the river path. Those ideas were refined and brought to a workshop in June where there were a variety of committee meetings and an open house. And this is where the work started to coalesce into concepts. And now the concepts are out in the survey. So this is a slide deck developed by Julie to explain the River Road Corridor Study zoning concepts. It has a voiceover. It's really cool. If you get a chance to look at this, the link is within the survey itself. But it just starts with the point of what we're doing with the neighborhood plan, and then gets right to the heart of it. One of the ways we implement is through zoning and development standards. So here's some of the things that neighbors liked in the early workshops as far as neighborhood uses, outdoor dining, neighborhood scale places to gather, and also new housing options like duplexes, courtyard, cottages, and mixed use along the corridor. So these kinds of things are imagined as the future of the neighborhood. Here's a look at current zoning. This is a diagram. We also have in the survey an actual zoning map that shows you each lot and parcel. But in general, there's a lot of light yellow on this map, and that's the R1 zone. There are several areas of C2 community commercial and some C1 neighborhood commercial. But the zoning is very blunt. For instance, the height limit in the C2 zone is 120 feet. And there's not much of a transition between C2 standards and the R1. So that's the current situation. The first concept is the idea of a narrow area of denser housing along the corridor of River Road and the side streets. So this is the orange, and it would be a new zone called C-Res, Corridor Residential. It's a variety of housing types, including 2 to 3 story apartments with transition standards down to the sides. And then concentrated in the red areas is a new zone called Corridor Mixed Use. And that would be pretty broadly accepting of different kinds of commercial and residential uses with stronger design standards that transition into the neighborhoods. That is common across both concepts, the corridor mixed use zone. Pay attention to the orange and how it goes between the commercial centers and down the side streets, because that's different in the next concept. So concept 2 is a wider area of middle housing. And some of you might remember the single family options concept from the South Willamette planning process. This is based on that and advanced and adapted a little bit. But it's basically a quarter-mile buffer around River Road and broadly permissive of middle housing types like duplexes, triplexes, and quads within walking distance of a high-frequency transit corridor, and less of the orange color in this concept. There they are side by side. And again, they both have the active mixed-use centers and transitions between zones by using new development standards. Here's an example of what those development standards might look like. A scale transition in terms of building height, different ways to buffer properties from one another through setbacks or trees or offsetting parts of buildings. And then the survey asks which option is best for the community. And there's always an open comment area to allow you to say what you like about one or the other. There's some details here, and I want to note one thing that's different on this slide than in the survey, and that has to do with dwelling units per acre in R1 and SFO. So you've heard a lot of talk about House Bill 2001. Our understanding of that is ever evolving, but this is an asterisk that says pending changes from recent HB 2001 legislation, because we don't know yet what we might need to do to our density standards in the R1 zone and any other zone that allows single family. Does that make sense? Okay. It's in process. And some details for the corridor mixed use zone as well are in the survey. This is envisioned as a zone that drops the maximum height from 120 down to 55 and adds the development standards, as I mentioned. Okay, there's the links that Kate was rattling off a little bit earlier. These are the direct SurveyMonkey links, but you can also get there from River Road Santa Clara plan.org. I got that right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. These are also included in there, direct comparisons of the existing zoning and the concept zoning. So you can see lot by lot. And that's the comparison for concept 2. And a variety of other diagrams, such as height diagrams, that show you the difference between existing and concept 1 and concept 2.
Okay, I have Commissioner Taylor and Commissioner Fragla in the queue, and we've got about 3 minutes.
I know.
This is a really hard question, so you don't have, you can punt it. So,
Punt.
yeah, punt before I even talk.
Yeah.
House Bill 2001, I mean, John basically brought it up. Commissioner Borowski and John, they kind of talked about it. How do the timelines, because I know the corridor study is actually funded, how do those timelines kind of overlap in terms of House Bill 2001? Because obviously the neighborhood's getting really involved, you're kind of ahead in some ways. So what does that look like from a logistical kind of funding standpoint and adoption?
I would say we're super fortunate to have this funded study that already was in really close alignment. The neighborhood goals already speak to adding density along the corridor and increasing the variety of housing options in the neighborhood. And so that was a really fortunate alignment. And you're right, we're part of the way down the road testing within the corridor area a concept for doing the zoning. And our working assumption is that this new zone created by the consulting team will have to be consistent with 2001 and implement it. So it does have a shorter timeline for implementation. But I don't see that as a problem. Outside of the corridor area, we have more work to do to understand how to align the hopes of the rest of the neighborhood planning area with citywide implementation of the House Bill. That's an ongoing conversation.
Just to add one more twist, 2/3 of River Road and approximately 40% of Santa Clara are not annexed, and my understanding is 2001 doesn't apply. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fragla.
Wasn't there a concept 3 that was the combination of 1 and 2?
In some people's minds, I'm sure there is a concept 3, but it's not been drawn yet. If some folks like elements of concept 1 and elements of concept 2, I could see that as a natural kind of combining of the two concepts, but we're not there yet.
Any other questions? Commissioner Baker?
Well, just a question. Obviously, CC&Rs override Senate Bill, so far anyways, Senate Bill 2001 in terms of what it can require. I was just wondering how common they might have been applied in the subdivisions, and probably more in Santa Clara than River Road, but there obviously have been recent subdivisions in River Road. You know, it'd be useful to have a map to see, you know, what part of the city would actually be affected by
Yeah, the-
effectively affected by,
I can further this out. The CCNRs are not mapped.
yeah.
They're so, they're buried in the, in the plats and the deeds of different developments all over the city throughout history, basically. So it would be a huge project to attempt to map that. But yeah, House Bill 2001 does not. It basically says that existing CCNRs prevail, but it prevents any new CCNRs being created that would inhibit the requirements of the bill.
I did look at this issue a little bit for the Neighborhood Leaders Council, and what I did is went to the county and took a look at subdivisions in each decade, doing a sampling, and what I found was that very roughly in the 90s or 80s, all of a sudden CCNR started to show up saying only one building per lot, no subdivision of lots. Prior to that, there were some like that, but you're right. I suspect in River Road, the subdivisions are older or not subdivided and less of an issue, but citywide and in these two neighborhoods, it is an issue.
Okay, well, thank you. I know we're out of time, and I'm not sure if Terry did share the presentation with commissioners, so do you guys have anything else to add?
I don't think so. I just want to say apologies for not having lunch here today. The vendor did not show. So they were supposed to and they didn't, so.
They're probably bringing them on a blue bike that did.
Okay.
Really sorry.
Well, thanks, everybody, and thanks all of our guests for coming today. Appreciate it. And with that, we are adjourned.